how do I even, reconciling queerness and faith? Maybe we don't need to. 4 years, people are just like, you're my crush
Oh
or
my
you're my husband.
word.
And I'm like, I love the consistency.
Be in the journey with you, and probably even where you are now, they are also with you in that space.
At the Fruit Basket, we're a very, very small team. And one, we are underfunded.
The preacher was not really even sorry about what they said, despite seeing that they've hurt someone. That's a human being, that's a soul.
We need to remember that we're dealing with fellow human beings who are not in our shoes, so they just don't get it. Because I think at the end of it, I was like, when I turn 21
Yeah.
and I move out of the house, because I plan to, then I will start transitioning.
Thank you for watching our video. This show is sponsored by DreamStream. DreamStream is a unique platform where creators can monetize their video content. All creators rely on support from people like you. Join us on the DreamStream platform to support your favorite creator and view the episode without any adverts. Follow the link in the description for a how-to guide. DreamStream, a place where you can create yourself.
Welcome to another episode of The Real Queer Talk with myself, your host, Tholo, the Inimitable one, Motaung. I am excited because today's guest, the last time I saw him in person was like 4 years ago.
Yes. 4 years
It's
ago.
unbelievable how time flies, all right? And he's a chief operations officer for an organization called the Fruit Basket, but he's also a minister of the gospel and also a professional. And today we get to talk and we get to know him better. And probably many of you knew him at the time when he became Hunk of the Year at the Feathers Awards. His name is Gorata Nzimande. Gorata, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's so good to be here. Wow, it's always amazing to sit and chat with you. I think, like you said, we last spoke about 4 years ago. And I think we said twice.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
had a very very long chat prior to the feathers,
yeah.
and then
Post the fathers as well.
post the feathers winning the Hunk of the Year award. So that was really cool. So
Yeah,
again, it's just always nice to sit and see you and talk with you. So I'm really looking forward
incredible.
to the conversation.
Right? Yeah, I'm also excited. And since you've won Hunk of the Year, what has changed?
Oh gosh, I was expecting this question because I was reflecting on it, kind of thinking about like, um, has anything changed, And
Yeah.
I think really what was moving about that for me was just, I think, recognition of the representation that exists for trans people, but also for trans masculine people.
Yeah.
And I think, sitting at the time and, kind of feeling out the atmosphere and thinking, am I really going to win this? I mean, I'm up against two, equally handsome hunks, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think just being nominated for me was just refreshing. Just knowing that there is representation, so that was enough for me. And so, insofar as what has changed, not much really. I think it was just an amazing confidence booster.
Yeah.
And I continue to hold it,
Yeah.
with confidence and in high regard, because it's wonderful to be recognized, just for who you are,
Yeah.
existing.
Yeah. Yeah. So does it score points like, in the market, how people look at you?
Um, I think there's two elements, right, that are at
Yeah.
play. There's, of course, like recognition and, being in activism and that sort of thing. And then there's the other side, which is, desirability,
Yeah.
and then just people maybe knowing of you because of that. And then I think sometimes that opens the door for conversations and makes it
Yeah.
easier. But I do find that other moments, it's like it kind of makes me feel like I'm objectified in a way,
Mm.
but I try not to make it that deep. I think it's
Yeah.
very light. It's a great conversation starter.
Yeah.
It's a nice, piece of decoration. It's in my office. In fact, it's on my
Right?
desk, right? And so it's always a point of conversation, when you come
Yeah.
into the office and I'm sitting on the desk, and yeah, so it's. I think it's a win-win.
Any crazy
You know.
incidents that you had to deal with it because of this?
Mm, I think I've dealt with crazy things outside of that
Okay.
anyway, so
Such
I
as?
wouldn't say, gosh, I wouldn't say it's because of that, but I mean, I try to. I mean, I'm an introvert,
Yeah.
right? So, and even just sitting here, I had to like just control myself and do some breathing. But like I
Yeah.
said, you make it easy to speak. You make it
Mm.
easy to come out of my shell. I think just generally for introverts,
Yeah.
it's hard to sit and talk. And I think what makes it a bit more difficult is when you don't really see an audience.
Mm.
And so you're speaking to the person in front of you and a potential other audience who you
Yeah.
don't know. Um, so yeah, I mean, some of the crazy things is just maybe people DMing me because I don't go out that much.
Yeah.
Um, for years, maybe like 4 years, people are consistently are just like, "You're my crush,"
Oh
or
my
"You're my husband,"
word.
and I'm like, I love the consistency. I really, really do. Like consistently crushing on someone for
Yeah.
half a decade is very
It's
admirable.
crazy
Like
though.
I'm like the
Like
stamina.
that long.
Yeah, I've had longer, but
Yeah.
yeah, convo for another time.
Yeah. So can still available in the market or
No, I feel like every time we talk, I'm not available.
uh,
Yeah,
but that's because you're not.
I'm
It is
not.
what it is,
It is what
right?
it is. It is what it is. Yeah, no, not
Okay.
available.
Okay.
Whatever that means. Mm.
We're not going to unpack it.
No, we're not
We're
going
not going to unpack it. Right. Let's talk about the incredible work that you're doing. The fruit basket. Can you just inform us what is it about and what your role entails?
Mhm. Well, I'm chief of operations at the Fruit
Mm,
Basket, and the Fruit Basket really is an organization that is trans-led, that is founded and directed by a trans man from Zimbabwe.
mhm.
And really, it was birthed from passion
Okay.
and his own personal lived experience of being a migrant in South Africa
Mhm.
and not having, that kind of community or place for him, to not only be documented, to regularize his stay in the country, but to find some kind of community where he can be himself. He can be a trans person, he can be a queer person, he
Yeah.
can access, basic services. And so what we've tried to create is just that community that is a one-stop shop, as we like to call it, for
Yeah.
queer refugees, coming from countries where they've had to flee persecution because of their sexuality, because of their gender identities.
Mhm.
And so we offer, a wide range of services.
Yeah.
And we do have a safe house project that we're currently running. And we have been running the safe house for a little over a year now.
Mhm.
And this was really in response to what was happening in Uganda,
Yeah.
the anti-homosexuality bill being passed, and then that trickled off into other countries, where there was now the anti-gender movement spreading like wildfire. So we've got people from Uganda, um, from Somalia, from Kenya, from Burundi, Zimbabwe, and even South Africans, because we understand being marginalized is not necessarily because of where you are. Even
Mm.
people are internally displaced. And so we also do skills development training. And what we try to do is we try to partner up with people who are already running those programs, right?
Okay.
So we're not per se being an accredited institution, but we
Yeah.
reach out to those institutions and say, can we partner up? Can we collaborate? Can we work together? Because it's also very difficult for people who are not documented to get access to the economy or to plug
True.
in to the economy of the host country. And so being a refugee means having those linkages. And then over and above all of that, we do work with lawyers for human rights, generally human rights lawyers who
Yeah.
have capacity and work pro bono to help us help the beneficiaries and the community members regularize their stays. And of course, that's been very difficult with the
Yeah.
xenophobic sentiment, with just the backlogs at Home Affairs. But that's really the nutshell of what we do and
Yeah.
what we try to do, yeah, on
Yeah.
a daily basis.
And I mean, being an operations manager means that you have your eyes and ears and even your hands, in each part, of the organization.
Sure.
How challenging has that been for you, particularly with also looking at limited resources that you have to work with, for you to achieve the objectives of what the organization is about?
Yeah, sure. That's literally what's been happening. All hands on deck.
Yeah.
At the Fruit Basket, we're a very, very small team. And one, we are underfunded. And so that means that the funds that come in from, a donor or just a donation, from the general public goes specifically, firstly, to the safe house.
Okay.
And then from there, we kind of figure out how do we stay afloat. There's internet connectivity that we need for the office. There's salaries, maybe volunteer stipends.
Yeah.
We can't really increase the team. And so, from an operations perspective, it's very difficult because when you're in operations, you have to figure out how to stay afloat.
Ish.
And so when your runway is short, that effectively means that, okay, I need to redirect my capacity to fundraising. And that can also be challenging because while you're fundraising, there's emergency work,
Yeah.
that must happen. I think a lot of our work also overlaps into our personal lives because when you're dealing with people who are in need of a place, a safe place, that means that at odd hours of the night, we'll get a referral to say someone has come in, they are at the border or they've just arrived, they're at Park Station or they're going to be at Park Station in a few hours. How do we make sure that they safely get to us? Someone is coming through OR Tambo, do we have resources? So things like that are very, very challenging because I think, like we always say in house, is that we want to be more advocacy based and have
Yeah.
advocacy strategies, but we find ourselves giving direct service because that's what's currently needed.
Ish.
That's the emergency.
Yeah.
And so it makes operations tricky, but we are trying our best to make sure that we raise funds for, the core of the
Yeah.
organization so that we run, longer and don't have to worry about kind of, finding ways to get money outside of the projects to pay salaries. But if we have core funding for 3 to 6 years or 3 to 5 years, then we know our running costs, fixed costs are sorted, and then we can redirect our efforts to like advocacy projects. How do we innovate? How do we think about improving the lives of the beneficiaries as opposed to like being reactionary, like what's happening now? Where's the emergency?
Yeah.
So it's very challenging.
Sure. So, for someone who wants to be part of the organization in terms of contributing, whether it's financially or providing services or maybe just even donating stuff that you need, how do they go about?
We've got a WhatsApp number that people can use to get in touch. And I don't know that off the top of my head, but
Yeah.
we're very active on social media as the Fruit Basket at Every Fruit, and we've got a GoFundMe running. I think it just makes it easier sometimes to, you know, put out a link, get donations in. We do get people who anonymously just want to give, and they
Yeah.
ask for our banking details. And then I think the biggest thing that we get in person would have to be clothing,
Okay.
which is highly appreciated because people leave in that moment instantaneously from
Yeah.
their countries, and they have whatever it is they have on them. It's your cell phone, it's a bit of money if you have, and the clothes on your back, and you're gone. And so we've been fortunate enough to have people who have come forward and say, these are clothes that we've done a company-wide drive for these clothes, and they've brought them to the house. And what the residents have been able to do is just put a pile on the floor and just kind of select, okay, this works for me, this looks good. And it's great because I think that's also a confidence booster.
Yeah.
They can feel like, even though I may be feeling like I'm in a country where I can't do much, but I can feel good.
Yeah.
I can be confident and I can feel comfortable. I can identify with who I know that I am.
Yeah.
And I'm in a place where I can express my gender, yeah.
What inspired you to do this kind of work? Because I'm listening to you and I'm realizing that it takes a lot to do this. You basically have to be selfless. You have to give yourself into it, because you can't do this kind of work for status or for,
Even
it
for
has to
money.
come from inside.
I think over and above like lived experience of just being queer in Africa, in South Africa, in Botswana, um, it's my love for people. I've always felt like I have a calling to be kind, to be
Yeah.
compassionate, to love, and how that translates for me as a queer person, as a trans person, means just being ready to assist the next person.
Yeah.
I previously worked in the NGO sector, in the queer, human rights movement sector, and then I went to corporate, and then I'm now back, right?
Yeah.
And so it's that 360 degrees full circle moment that you arrive at in life, right? And it's like your calling will always
Yeah.
kind of pull you back towards
It always
where
locates
you're
you.
supposed to
It doesn't
be.
matter where you are.
So it's really just a calling. Like it's challenging, it's overwhelming, it's exhausting, but it also challenges you to think about how you pour back into your cup
Yeah.
as you're busy pouring into everyone else's cup. And so I think it's just a passion and a calling for me. Yeah.
And how do you pour back in your cup?
That's very interesting because we were just talking about how exhausted we are.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
What centers me is exercise. I think that's the first thing. I find ways to move.
Yeah.
And so if there's an
That's why
opportunity
he's
to
got the body he
walk,
has.
do I still though? If I've got an opportunity to walk, I'll
Yeah,
walk. If there's
yeah.
an opportunity to run, I'll run. If there's an opportunity to stretch, if there's an opportunity to
Dreamstream, a place to create yourself. Record video, music, and podcast in our full-service studio. Dreamstream, a place to create yourself. Record video, music, and podcast in our full-service studio. Dreamstream, a place to create yourself.
even just dancing. I mean, I remember thinking to myself that, oh, I'm so exhausted. I want to work out, but I don't have energy.
Yeah.
And then I literally just got up, put on music, and I
Yeah.
moved, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I feel great.
So you just took
There's
that
movement,
exercise.
right? And
Yeah.
so that's what it takes for me. I would like to think I'm a very prayerful person, and that really grounds me as well. And so
Yeah.
I'll find quiet moments to do just that.
Yeah.
It's very simple, but those are very powerful for me. I need to exercise, I need to move,
Yeah.
and then I need to just, feel like where's my spirit at right now? Like how am I feeling? And I think sometimes how you can also pour back is just by speaking lovely things to yourself, affirming things to yourself.
Yeah.
That's
Incredible.
important. That's
Incredible.
important.
So you're now a minister, and there's a whole lot of different views about being queer and Christian, right? Firstly, what does it mean for you to be a minister as a queer person? And also perhaps share with us the highlights in terms of the journey or that you took for you to get to where you are now.
Wow, it's been a very long journey.
Yeah.
And I like to say that it's ongoing. And I think having a title like being a pastor, being a priest, reverend, minister, is literally just so people kind of see where you're at. But people don't necessarily know where you're coming from or where you're going.
Yeah.
Beyond that identifier. For me, it's been a very long time coming. It's a journey that's ongoing. I remember, if we were to get into it, I remember my first encounter with God. I was possibly 12 years old, and I was in primary school, going to high school, and I was invited to, how we used to have like Christian youth fellowships.
Yes.
and I was really drawn to that, those ministries in school, and I joined that at school. And there was one Friday afternoon we were invited to, attend a service that was held in the school hall, and I was like,
There
why
you
not?
go. Yeah.
And I don't really remember the message that was preached. I remember more how I felt when I was there. And that's it, it almost was like a compass for me, right? To say you're at the right place.
Yeah.
You always know it here, how you feel
You
about where
always
you
do.
are. And I remember just having an encounter of peace and just like overwhelming joy. And I remember just being emotional, and I teared up, and I was like, I don't understand what this is. And it kind of reinforced what I thought I always felt. And
Okay.
that simply was that, oh, one day I want to grow up and preach. I want to be someone that speaks about the Lord, the love of God. And you don't really know what that means when you're a kid. I cannot tell you that there was anyone in my family who was spiritual or religious. I think everyone was just like trying to get by.
Okay.
But I was the only one who was very curious. I was the only one who was adamant to find out, who is this God? Who is this Jesus? How do I get in touch with them? How do I
Yeah.
get closer? How do I cultivate a relationship? And so that was like really like the birth place of it. And then you go through, I mean, I'm 33 now. I was 12, 13, so between then and now was just like this up and down of like identity crisis.
Yeah.
Where am I at? Of course, you've got the Bible that says this. I'm feeling like this, God, what do I do? And I think the most important thing that I did for myself was to always say that I need to go back to the one who gave me that feeling of joy and peace,
Yeah.
and kind of try to get answers, because there's no human being who's satisfying that curiosity.
That's so powerful.
So for me, what it means to be a minister of the gospel means that it's more than just about what I preach or what I'm going to say to people, but it's more about how I treat people. I'm more interested in emulating what I believe or who I believe Jesus is,
Yeah.
rather than constantly preaching what he has said. I don't know if that makes sense.
It
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. And navigating what believers interpret as what we should be as queer people versus who we are. How do you navigate that? Because I think not even I think I know that a lot of us as queer people have always been challenged by that. I know for one, I went to endless altar calls because I wanted to get free from this. I know people who are no longer going to church because they're looked and in a certain way, they're spoken to in a certain way, and others have just got to a place of saying God doesn't exist. Because if you say God is love, why can't you love me as I am?
I think what I always lead with is two things. I believe that ministry doesn't exist outside of love and mercy. There is no way that I can preach Christ, preach the gospel, even preach God as love,
Yeah.
without mercy or love or forgiveness, right? First, because we're human beings.
Yeah.
And so when you think about how do I even reconciling queerness and faith, maybe we don't need to. And I go back to what I said, to say the journey is still ongoing.
Yeah.
Because people ask me, so like, where do you stand? I'm like, God is love. That's where I stand, right? Jesus loves you. That's where, because I feel like queer people also don't hear it enough. There's a lot of ministration that is not leading enough with love or mercy. It's a lot of like shame, condemnation, hatred, and rejection. And it's like, that song is very old. It's time now for people to be led to hearing the message of love. Because, I would even say that we've like out preached hate and condemnation, right? Maybe we need to shift the focus, even just as ministers of the gospel, who are not queer. I always, kind of have this disruptive way of thinking to say, maybe what if you changed your messaging? There is no way that you are going to preach the same thing, even if you believe it to be true
Yeah.
beyond the shadow of a doubt, and you think that's going to change the heart of a person. The only way to get to the heart of a person is to show them love, right?
Yeah.
Is to um, emulate what and I know that this used to be a thing. What would Jesus do? But that's literally what needs to happen, right? You need to think and pause and say, okay, I genuinely believe that this is a sin, for example, right? As a non-queer Christian. But what would Jesus do to get through to a person? Because people are, I always like to say that when I introduce myself, like my queerness is last almost, because there's so much more to Gorata.
Yeah.
My life
Right.
is not surrounding my queerness, although I am queer and I own that.
Yeah.
But there's so much more beyond me. I've got skills, I've got competencies, strengths, weaknesses, dreams, goals, desires, etc. And so I think what really that looks like is allowing people to cultivate their own relationships, because the walk is also very personal. It's deeply personal. We'll all come in fellowship together, but we are all going through so many different things that only God knows, right? And so it's our responsibility as ministers is to bring the gospel,
Yeah.
is to bring the Lord Jesus, is to bring the love of God, and then walk people through that. And people have different convictions,
Yeah.
but the most important thing is to just not condemn people. Letting love lead doesn't look like what's happening today.
Yeah.
Loving thy neighbor is not what's happening today in the church, and that's the truth.
That's the truth, because I've got a friend who just told me recently that they stopped going to church because as much as they felt at home, but how they'd be looked at, right? It's so judgmental. It's so hateful also to a certain extent. It makes them uncomfortable to be in the space. As much as they can feel the presence of the Holy Spirit, they can feel the love of God, but from the followers or people that they go to church with, they experience that. And now you find that people like ourselves will go to churches that I would say queer friendly, in that they have been established and are run by queer people. So then at the same time, one would say, isn't that transforming the transformed? That, we should be integrated in society. We should be integrated in the kingdom of God like everybody else. Is it okay that we run there as a safe space where it's only us? Or do we keep going to those churches? We know of an incidents where Somizi stood up and, left because certain things were said. And the preacher was not really even sorry about what they said, despite seeing that they've hurt someone. That's a human being. That's a soul. That's a soul that had come to God. And even if it's one person, but the Bible says the heavens, rejoice when one soul is saved. What's your take on that?
My take is, if we go where, or rather go where you feel safe, but you get to a place where you realize that what transforms you or what brings you peace is not necessarily the space, but the message that is preached, right? Like, the reason why queer Christians have had to cultivate their own safe spaces is because the spaces are not conducive to be in the presence. So it doesn't mean that the presence of the Lord comes down and says, this is queer, I can't be here.
Yeah.
We've seen queer ministers worshiping and leading people into that atmosphere. There are churches that have queer ministers who are on the worship team that people don't know, right? Maybe because they've not come out, but the work is still going on.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's always the question. And when I sit in private with non-queer, pastors, prophets, etc., I pose a question and I say, you will not get through to queer people, not necessarily because of the message that you're preaching, but because of your approach. And I remember sitting with one pastor, and I said to him that queer people are not welcomed. In fact, they're condemned and rejected. And he says, he said he didn't get it. And he's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, no, but that's what's happening, And I think for him, it was a light bulb moment to say, actually, this is going on, even if it may not be going on, every Sunday, or perhaps even in his ministry, but
But
I
it
just
is
opened his
happening.
eyes to say, maybe think about the way that you've been ministering. The way you've been ministering has not been, exclusively to say, we are all sinners, for example. And that's what creates then the hierarchy. Like
Yeah.
we of course know, like when we really get become like scholars and unpack scripture, which we're not doing, right? But it's just a conversation. Like we know that there is one sin, for example, that's unforgivable. But like when you put sins on a hierarchy, which is what is happening in the church, and people feel like, but this is not fair, because if you're going to stand with conviction, and that's why I'm always like, if you're going to stand with conviction and say your revelation of scripture is that, homosexuality is a sin, then you can do that. It's fine, right? But you need to think about whatever it is that you are doing to be fishers of men, or to be a fisher of men. When you exclude other fish as a fisherman, it doesn't make sense, right? And so um my thing is just like, we have a greater responsibility, and the greatest responsibility is saving souls.
Yeah.
And it is not, I think a lot of ministers as well are wary about, or maybe just afraid of, oh, I don't want to dilute the gospel. But you're not diluting the gospel if you are loving people first, or forgiving, or being merciful, because that's exactly what happened to you.
Yeah.
In order for you to get to where you are in your walk with the Lord, there had to be a lot of forgiveness. There had to be a lot of mercy. And I think when people then feel like they've been saved, or when they have been saved, there's a level of, I am now absolved, all of my sins are, like I'm now holy, I'm pure. But we don't know what's happening in the background. We don't
Yeah.
know how much mercy is happening every day. The Bible says his mercies are new every day, right?
True.
For a reason, because we need them.
We do.
Even the
Yeah.
pastor who's gonna, preach on Sunday morning, he's not been holy, 6 days out of the 7, but he constantly needs to tap into the mercies. And I think really the Christian approach is different. It should be another way. Like I always say, we just need to think about what we're saying and what we're doing, and that needs to change. And I
Yeah.
don't know if that's going to change, right? But I also confidently think that God is raising up shepherds to bring back his lost sheep.
Yeah.
And like you were saying, there are queer people who's just like, left Christianity, or they've left God. This Jesus thing doesn't work, but I don't think God has forgotten about those people. And that's why, then we would have those queer spaces where God
Yeah.
would raise up people who would be used still, like you were saying, by the Holy Spirit. The presence of God is there. And so that shows us something.
Dreamstream, a place to create yourself. Record video, music, and podcast in our full-service studio. Dreamstream, a place to create yourself. Record video, music, and podcast in our full-service studio. Dreamstream, a place to create yourself.
I think if we had queer spaces where there was no presence, it was just, then we'd be like, yeah, no, God is not here. But guaranteed, like whenever anyone is gathered purely,
Yeah.
to be in the presence,
That's true.
regardless of their gender identity or sexuality, God shows up. God really shows up. And non-queer Christians won't know that because they don't go to those spaces.
Yeah. They
And so they
wouldn't.
think that we are just, in some devil worshipping cult. And that's not the thing. We are, our lives are being transformed. There's healing taking place.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
Yeah, that is so true. I know with my church, we've seen God doing incredible things, moving things in directions that we did not expect. That sometimes we'll even have a straight pastor coming to preach, and God uses them, to transform people's lives. And they will not know because they're not there. But I think also what I appreciate about you is that you're not using your privilege of being seen as a man and experienced as a man, and not standing to say, but you need to be aware. We've got this community that is being excluded in terms of being part of the Christian community, but they're always or continuously judged,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. The trans journey, right? I'd like us to move to that part for you to, and I'd like, because we've heard trans journeys that has happened, but with you, my curiosity is, in completing, or if you're still in the transitioning phase, how has life been fulfilling for you? Because that happens for a reason. For you to transition, it is because you needed to be in that space where you feel whole with yourself. And I'm curious to know, how fulfilling has life been for you?
Yeah, we don't get a lot of like transition joy stories. I think a lot of stories we're hearing now is, oh, people are de-transitioning, people
Yeah.
are not happy, people
Yeah.
realized, oh, this is not what I want to do, and that's fine. But there are too many narratives of like regret, and there's a lot more about joy,
Yeah.
and bliss and euphoria.
Right.
And for me, it's really been a crazy roller coaster ride, but all in all, very affirming. Every milestone has been rubber stamping who I know myself to be
Yeah.
and who I am. And every year I reflect and I'm like, oh, I was on the car in the car on the way here. I was like, oh, this kickstarted for me 12 years ago. I was sitting with a psychologist 13 years ago, and then 12 years ago, I had my first shot of testosterone. And of course that's perpetual until I decide
Yeah.
otherwise.
Yeah.
But man, it's been so like surreal. It's been
Yeah.
incredibly surreal. There are moments of because we're human beings, you question, I wonder what life would have been like if I didn't have access. And I recognize my privilege in that way to
Yeah.
say, the doors have opened for me in different ways for me to actualize and affirm my gender. And there are a lot of people who don't get that, and who really want. There are
Right.
people who are happy enough not to to transition medically if you have it that way, but there are people who don't have access. And just always remembering them, and just always knowing that like you're saying, I have a voice to then stand, which gives me a responsibility to speak on their behalf and kind of challenge some of the norms that are very exclusive, where people can just get access so that they can be affirmed. I think for me, it's just the little joys, being able to wear a t-shirt,
Yeah.
being able to go to the beach, and going to the beach and wearing a t-shirt as I am, as I know myself to be, right? As a boy, as a man, just the little joys of shaving, the little joys of, oh, my voice was getting deeper, very like simple things and very trivial to other people, but these
They
are
are
things that just
affirming
like
to
affirm
you.
and they rubber stamp, like, oh, this is who I used to dream about. This is who I used to close my eyes and see and get out of, pick myself out of depressive episodes just by visualizing where I wanted to go. And now I'm like, wow, I'm here.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Now I can go out there and do things in the world because I'm not like dealing with the fact that my mental health is not okay. Yeah, so it's just been a roller coaster ride, but affirming.
Yeah. And the family, the friends, do you feel that they were able to be in the journey with you, and probably even where you are now, they are also with you in that space?
I've been blessed enough and privileged enough to have a very supportive family.
Yeah.
I think even maybe some family members in their lack of understanding or lack of knowledge have been very open to being teachable.
Yeah.
And I had to grow some patience, especially with my father figure, my stepdad. I had to do a lot of work of educating, and it was not well received. And then I had to say, okay, wait a minute. He has his own conditioning.
Yeah.
He grew up his own way. We think differently. We are different people, and I had to be patient with him. literally hold his hand, even though I felt like, man, I want someone to hold my hand,
Yeah, right.
because I'm figuring this
And he's the
out.
relevant person
And
also that
exactly,
actually
right?
they should be.
And he doesn't get it. And it's only until, I'll tell you, last year,
Mhm.
where he was able to, call me son,
Wow.
call me Gorata, invite me to do things, go with him. And for me, another level,
Yeah.
another milestone
Yeah,
of feeling
right.
affirmed. And I think what he just said was that, at the end of the day, you are my child. And I think that's important.
Mm.
So I can
Mm.
say many things as your dad or your father figure, but at the end of it all, no matter what happens,
You're
you
my
belong to
child,
me. You are my
right?
child, and you always will be. And so he asked for forgiveness as well. And so for me, that was
Oh,
like,
man.
mind blowing. But the patience paid off. And I think a lot of the times as queer people, we're not ready to be patient.
Mm.
Understandably so, there's just a lot going on. But we need to remember that we're dealing with fellow human beings who are not in our shoes, so they just don't get it.
Yeah.
And so my family has just been, they've been amazing. My mother was the first person to know. I remember, I don't know if I shared this with you, but I wrote her an 8-page letter.
Whoa.
I don't remember
That
the
was quite a bit.
contents, right? But I poured
You
my
poured
heart
your heart
out. I
out.
poured my
Yeah.
heart out. And I think she mentioned still having that. And I was like, I don't know if I'm ready to see that.
Yeah.
But it would be interesting, So I spoke to her and she just didn't get it, And I think getting all of that, because I think I started from like, oh, I've been feeling like this. And these are some of the, the steps that I took to understand myself. I did this research, and because I think at the end of it, I was like, when I turn 21
Yeah.
and I move out of the house, because I plan to, then I will start transitioning. And you have to be okay with that. Cool, just be my mom, support me.
Yeah.
And I think she was welling up with a lot of emotions
Mm.
because, one, I don't know how to support you as my son.
Yeah.
I don't know what resources you need. Is this
Mm.
safe? Are there
Yeah.
any dangerous procedures? Like,
Right.
what needs to happen to you because you are
From a
my
point of
child?
concern.
And I was like,
Yeah.
that is a different perspective, because I think
Mm.
we just expect two things: you accept me or you reject me,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
there's no in between. And she was more like, okay, I want to know how to show up for you as my
Mm.
child the best way that is affirming for you, given the information you've just
Yeah.
given me. And my siblings, 3 siblings, that come after me, were very like, are you happy? Kids like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm gonna have another older brother. Okay, great. Cool. Okay. Then they move on with life, and
Mm.
that's it. It's like, okay, cool. Cousins, same thing, aunts, uncles, they gotta get used to it. And
Yeah.
yeah,
That,
it's
that that
been,
that's
yeah.
incredible. And with parents, I love what you're saying in terms of patience,
Mm,
that as queer people we don't realize that whatever we're going through, they also go through, right? Because if you're coming out, they also have to come out.
yeah.
If you're
Yeah.
transitioning, they also have to transition with you. And the challenge becomes when they are, because they love you, they'll be concerned about you.
Yeah.
Now they don't know how to support you, they don't know how to deal with it. And I always say it becomes our responsibility to teach them, because they need that knowledge. We get to be more knowledgeable because it's about us, and we also have our community that we live with. So extending that patients, like you say, and also educating really goes a long way,
It does.
because eventually they get it and it becomes easier for
Yeah.
them to work with you. But also you spoke about on social media something that really caught my interest. And I know for some people it can be controversial, but I felt
What
that,
did I
okay, this is very interesting, and I think important also to
say?
talk about,
Yeah.
to say to what extent can people transition if they want to, and also sharing that if a person that they transition not only the top part but also fully, how much it will cost, take us there in terms of what brought you to that point, to talk about that, and how, for you, how important is it to talk about that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I represent the trans men community, trans masculine community, and the trans community nonetheless. And
Yeah.
so I know what it means, for people to transition in terms of access, right?
Yeah.
So there is no one way or right way to transition.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way to like complete a transition, because I think it doesn't really end.
Yeah.
It's a journey. That's just a journey. um, and you can get to a point where you are affirmed in your body by different things, right? It could be education, it could be just socially. I want to wear, this kind of clothing. I want this to be my name. This is the kind of hair I want to wear. It could be medically as well. And so I think what really brought me, and I remember that, kind of that thought process was thinking about quality of life in terms of sex, because people are having
Yeah.
sex, adults who are consenting and who are queer. It's an added layer for trans people because there's a conversation of what's happening down there.
Yeah.
One, people are curious. Two, we are dating, right? We're in relationships, and so a lot of the conversations with the guys is either conversations are not happening. One, two, there's a lot of fear around that, fear of being judged. One of the controversial things is within the queer community, maybe there's people not understanding that you can be a trans man, for example, and be gay because gender and sex are not,
Are not the same. Yeah.
completely different. And and I think within those masculine spaces, there are not conversations that are happening enough, and so the guys will kind of hide or maybe suppress their feelings, and it's actually like, yes, I'm a trans man, but I'm gay, or I'm bi, or I'm pansexual. And so it got me thinking about like quality of life, and are we really talking about sex?
Yeah.
And we're not. And pleasure means that I either kind of, it's a secretive thing because it's private, right? It happens in the privacy of your own home or whatever, but we're not really willing to engage because we think somehow it reduces our level of masculinity. And I can't speak about trans femininity, but like from a masculine perspective,
Yeah.
is if I talk about sex, it forces me to talk about genitals, and maybe that's uncomfortable for me. So I'd rather not say anything, right? But at the end of the day, if you're a human being that engages in
Dreamstream, a place to create yourself. Record video, music, and podcast in our full-service studio. Dreamstream, a place to create yourself. Record video, music, and podcast in our full-service studio. Dreamstream, a place to create yourself.
consensual sex, then your genitals that you don't want to talk about are involved.
They
Because
are.
on the other side of pleasure is health, right? It's sexual health, which is very
Yeah.
important. And so if we can't talk about pleasure, then it means we also can't talk about sexual health. And so the whole conversation also surrounds like access to bottom surgery, if we
Yeah.
call it that, for trans masculine people or trans men who would like to have affirming surgery or bottom surgery. The not the outcomes, but the procedures are inaccessible in that, one, they're incredibly expensive. Two, the expertise is very scarce,
Limited. Yeah.
very limited. You know, it's very different on the inverse, right? If you are assigned male at birth and you transition from male to female,
Yeah.
it's more accessible in terms of cost and expertise. But at the same time, not that it's accessible to everyone, because not everyone can
Is able
afford
to afford it.
that,
True.
right? But I think in terms of like medicine and practice in surgery, it's more common, or it's less complex, even though all these procedures are surgeries that are
And
invasive,
probably
right?
it's more common because it's less complex,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So there are places where you can go, like where you will find more surgeons who have practiced, like Thailand,
Yeah.
India, for example, even the US. The US, obviously with medicine more advanced, they've
Yeah.
got,
Number
a
leading.
trans clinic, very, very good trans clinic. And some of their health insurances do cover some of these, procedures, and we are nowhere near there. I think you'll get
Yeah.
like one or two cases that maybe cover, hysterectomies, for example, for trans men, but it's a fight.
Yeah.
It's a fight with your medical, um, with your insurer, and it's probably very expensive as well. Um, so that's the thing, really. It's just
So
access,
is it
and
still taken as cosmetic surgery or
in most parts, yeah,
yeah?
it's not seen as anything, affirming, life threatening, or
So where
must happen instantly.
how do we get to a point where not only government but even the public sector get to see it as a human rights issue because it is a human rights issue?
I think we're closer to getting that happen more in public hospitals because there are more practicing hospitals,
Okay.
like Steve Biko,
Yeah.
and Groote in Cape Town.
Yeah.
I'd say those, stand at the top,
Yeah.
because that's where surgeons come to practice,
Mm.
and I think that's a good place to start. And maybe it's an advocacy issue
Yeah.
because we can't say there are no trans people because trans people are there.
They are.
Hence why you can
Yeah.
get long, extensively long waiting lists. And maybe just advocacy campaigns, which, to be honest, are happening in the background. There are organizations that are doing great work, with regards to just medicine, depathologization, um, and yeah, it's really an advocacy issue, and we can't, I remember as we're sitting, just thinking about how do we make things accessible. And it's like, oh, the easiest thing to do is to have a pool of funds so that people can get funded and then go and do it privately. But it doesn't solve, the issue that you're saying to say
Yeah.
it's a human issue, it's a life issue. How do we communicate that? Yeah.
Yeah. Sure. Um, and I appreciate this conversation because for me is as we speak, we get to sort of bring access to other trans men out there, but also there are young ones that are growing.
Yeah.
They look up to you because you are here. You've walked the path before them. For them is what is it that they can learn, from you guys, and I'd like you to speak from a teacher or an activist perspective, not your personal experience, in terms of for trans men that perhaps you have spoken to or have encountered that you see that they want bottom surgery, but they can't get it or they can't access it. How does that impact their lives? Because you also touched that it's also a quality of life issue.
I mean, yeah, right. Look, sex is always going to be like controversial. Um, but when we get real, it's happening. And it's really all about where your discomfort lies. I know that there are, trans men who are okay to not transition medically at all and are affirmed.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with guys who are on the other spectrum, right? Who are saying, I want to transition medically and I want to get bottom surgery and I will be happy and I'll be good. And there are some who, just want top surgery.
Yeah.
And I think all of that should be made okay. I think that's also another thing. There is pressure. There's a
Yeah.
lot of pressure. You'll have the young guys meet you and say, man, I look up to you and I want to get there. You are kind of the blueprint of where I want to get. And I think we should be able to say, relax and figure it out for yourself, whatever it is you want to be and where you want to go. And you'll realize that, it's something that I think is very common when you begin hormone replacement therapy. And this has happened for me and a number of other guys I know, is there's a level of mental freedom that comes with that. It's almost like an energy boost for your mental health, where anxiety is reduced. You get out of a depressive episode, you're able to dream again.
Yeah.
And it changes a lot, and I remember getting to a point where I was like, if I could arrive at this point where I am mentally, then I wouldn't stress about having affirming surgeries
Okay.
because I'm already affirmed in my mind
Yeah.
and in my
Yeah.
heart as a man.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
the only reason sometimes why it needs to translate on the outside is for society, you know.
True.
And so when
True.
internally it shifts for you, then it changes everything. And the outward doesn't matter. And so that's where the powerful conversation begins to say there doesn't need to be an end goal or an end picture for you. Wherever it is along that journey you want to stop, that's fine. You're
Yeah.
not going to change being a man or being a woman or maybe non-binary or maybe non-conforming. It's not going to change. Where you stop is not going to change. And then how then society views us and deals with us, that's different advocacy now.
Yeah.
Those
Yeah.
are the things we strategize about, constantly campaign about. But insofar as like quality of life is that sex is happening, dating, relationships, there are a number of things that that have been made available, not necessarily accessible, which is what I meant to say. For trans men, for example, who cannot get bottom surgery,
Yeah.
they have access to prosthetics.
Mm.
And the thing about prosthetics is they're very expensive
Yeah.
because they are tailored, intricately to look like the real thing, to be as real as possible.
Yeah.
And that's what we want. But we then, the offset is that what we want, we can't get because it's just so well designed and so well done. It's too expensive. And then we have to think about, okay, what's the alternative? Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there an alternative?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I love the fact that, you highlight the importance of it has to start inside, because yes, you can go for bottom surgery, but if inside you're not okay, it becomes pointless as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Time. Yeah. There's like
governor, yeah.
like it's always great having conversations with you, and I hope we'll have another chat
I
sometime
hope so. I think
because
we've got a lot to unpack,
right.
especially on the, spiritual / religious side of the
Yeah,
conversation.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But thank you so much for coming
Thank
through
you for having
and
me.
also for always allowing yourself, to share and pour, your heart out and share everything.
No, it's humbling. It's always great to talk to you.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that is Gorata Nzimande. So he's shared so much with us. I hope that you got some inspiration, you got empowered as well, and that you found a place of solace, if I should put it that way. And that's how we celebrate each other as we wrap up the Pride Month 2024. Until the next episode, stay well.